Master Your Mindset Radio, episode 44.
Welcome to Master Your Mindset Radio, the show where we empower you to conquer limiting beliefs and transform your world with your gifting and purpose. Now for your host, Elizabeth Nader.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. I am honored today to bring to you a very successful businessman, somebody who knows what it's like to grow something from start to explosive growth, somebody who's played in the field for a long time and helps a lot of entrepreneurs. Welcome Mike Krupit to the show. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to get all of your wisdom and knowledge for my audience, not just for those who are entrepreneurs or want to be or whatever that looks like for them, but because I passionately believe that the entrepreneurial mindset is actually the mindset that makes life better for everyone. And so what you're going to share today will be absolutely golden nuggets of wisdom for anyone, not just for those people who are growing a business. So first of all, Mike, I want you to talk about your background leading up to you founding Trajectify in 2013, which is what you're doing now. So give us a flavor for what you've done in your career and then bring us up to present to what you're doing now.
Sure. I was a software engineer. In the mid-'80s, I ended up in Silicon Valley to mostly do my postgraduate work. And when I realized I didn't want to be in academia anymore, I was in the heart of Silicon Valley. And I got exposed to one startup and then another startup. And then I came back east to where I was raised to raise my family. And over the course of the next 20 years, another 6 startups. So it was a career in growing young tech companies. And I went from software engineer to chief technical officer to chief operating officer to ultimately chief executive officer. And I spent the second half of my career focused on not only founding businesses, but getting businesses through various stages of growth, not just financially, not just from a product or a customer perspective, but also from an organization perspective. After 8 startups, I said no more. Technically, after 7 startups, I said no more. And one thing we've learned is never say never.
Right.
And so after number 8, I had that what do I want to be when I grow up moment.
Yeah. I
was 50 years old and said, as I developed my leadership, I've done a lot as a coach, and I'm going to start a coaching practice. Mm-hmm. And that led me to form Trajectify in 2013 to help founders become CEOs, to help develop leadership organizations, to help companies get through the various stages of growth from 1 million to 5 million, 5 million to 10 million, and so on.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, one thing I want you to talk about just real quickly, because it's on your site right now, and I love this because I'm a coach in a different realm, but I'm a coach. You talk about the difference between a coach and a consultant, and I think that's very valuable for people to understand. That word coach has been thrown around so much in the last decade, but I don't think there's a great understanding of how that operates differently than the other professions. So can you explain that to people?
So when I started the practice, I ran into that exact challenge. Everyone was using the word coach and mentor and advisor somewhat interchangeably. So just for my own sake, to be able to sell a service and get the business started, I had to get some clarity around it. And I developed these 4 definitions, which are by no means non-standard, but people still do use the words interchangeably.
Right.
The consultant is someone who you hire to do the work for you. You need a little bit of extra capacity or some extra expertise, so you bring in somebody to go do the work that you can't do or choose not to do.
Right.
The advisor is someone who has a lot of insight, right? And all you want from them is the answers. They have experience in areas where you lack experience, and you want to tap into their experience. So you ask the questions, they give you the answers.
Right.
The mentor and coach then gets a little fuzzy, and we differentiate them this way. The mentor is a relationship. It's a relationship where 2 people, the mentor and the mentee, develop an emotional bond over time, where the mentor has been in the mentee's shoes, and where they both care enough about one another, they both get a lot out of the relationship, and the mentor basically helps the mentee grow through their profession, through their family, through their life.
Right.
Which is very different from a coach, because a coach is a professional. Right? Mentors aren't necessarily professional. They're usually not.
Right.
A coach is someone who helps you grow. And while mentors do some coaching, as do consultants and advisors, a coach really doesn't have to have been in your shoes, right? The coach is the one who can help you create this clarity around goals, the strategy to meet the goals, the accountability to follow that strategy.
Yes.
Support as you're going through the roller coaster of meeting goals or not meeting goals. And the coach provides structure, provides an outside in, and very importantly, provides an unemotional perspective. Because from the inside out, from our loved ones, from our mentors, from our partners, they're all emotional about what it is that we do. And to me, it's important that the coach be unemotional.
Right, because all those other people have some kind of stake in the outcome. So I am obviously a big fan of coaches, but I think people sometimes need to step back and realize that high performers, whether in business, athletics, they have coaches, and they have coaches at all levels. You rarely would you see, let's take the field of athletes, for example, of sports, of high performers in that field. They all have coaches. They have coaches till they retire. You know, they know that they're never able to stand alone completely, or they will at some point just hit a ceiling in their ability to push through. So I'm a big believer in what a coach does. And you've built an entire company around the concept that entrepreneurs need a coach to bring them to the next stage of growth for their business, right?
Exactly. And we're very familiar with the concept of coaches. All professional athletes have coaches. Most amateur athletes, even the 4-year-old soccer players, have coaches. In fact, the professional athletes probably have multiple coaches. You know, a good golfer, a good baseball pitcher, they may have as many as 8 or 9 different coaches.
Right.
And we interchange our coaches sometimes. When a coach becomes too inside out or too emotional about us, we may switch to another coach. The same thing is true with entertainers, with actors, with singers, with any sort of performer. They have a coach. They have a coach for their stage presence, for their voice, for their acting, perhaps. So we're very familiar with the concept. I guarantee you that every CEO of the Fortune 100 companies has an executive coach. Coaching is something that is very commonplace. We just don't always think about it for ourselves.
No, we don't. And I also think, having been an entrepreneur for so long, and I think we tend to think about doing everything ourselves. So we don't tend to reach out to recognize, you know, we've started this business, we have this great idea, and because it's early stage, we have to sort of do a little bit of everything. And, you know, we bring in help where we need it, but we're pretty much pushing ourselves as sort of the profile of someone who chooses to be an entrepreneur, that they are self-motivated, that they can push themselves. The trap is that you get to the point where you no longer realize that you need outside help, right? Or you hit a ceiling and you're not necessarily saying, wow, in order to get to the next stage, I need someone from the outside. And of course some do, but more and more people, I think, need to understand the value of that. So your clients are those who have started a business, they've achieved a level of success, let's say they're at $1 million, whatever that looks like for their industry, and they're coming to you saying, I need to get to the next phase. So you're looking at them and you're saying, I can help you. What does that look like? How do you coach people from a mindset standpoint to go from the initial stages of launching something to growing it to the point where it is now this fully functioning large organization?
For entrepreneurs, and not only entrepreneurs, they sometimes look for the coach. They look for someone like me when they reach the boundaries of their comfort zone. And hopefully, you know, they probably haven't gone too far out of their comfort zone, but some of them might have and began to make mistakes and retreated. But for me, what I'm looking to do is take them on that journey outside of their comfort zone, because that's where all the growth will happen, the growth for them as leaders and the growth for their businesses. And one of the great things that we have as coaches who work on both leaderships and business growth together is we can measure the growth of a leader or a leadership team through the growth of the business. So there's it's not only qualitative goals that we're meeting, we can also look towards meeting quantitative goals. So for coaching leaders of businesses, it's really about setting, when the goals are set beyond the comfort zone of the entrepreneur or the entrepreneur's team, and mapping out that journey and being with them along that journey as they're growing their comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if you look at an entrepreneur as a founder, let's use that label. Mm-hmm. What does that mindset shift, look like from founder to CEO? That journey of going, and not every founder can take that journey necessarily. I know there are times when there's a recognition that, perhaps that's not the role they're going to stick with. But let's say for the ones that you take from founder to CEO, what does that shift look like from a mindset standpoint? What do they need to go through in terms of their belief system and all of that in order to get to the point where they are a CEO now?
There's a bunch of common factors. Of course, it's different for different leaders. The biggest obstacle that most of them have trouble overcoming is delegation, right? And delegation is not just getting someone else to do it, but it's also letting someone else do it their way, not your way. And that's often the highest hurdle at this part of the journey, when they're shifting their mindset from I do everything, I wear all the hats, because that's what an entrepreneur does, that's what a business founder does, to I am now accountable for the results of other people, of a team of people.
Right.
And I can no longer, it's not practical for me to do all the work myself. And it's not practical for me to micromanage, to manage the day-to-day work of everyone else, because I've got CEO responsibilities that I need to do now that I've never had to do before.
Right.
So delegation and accountability are the first areas that we start to work on with a leader who's going, with a founder who's going towards more of a CEO role.
And isn't there a fear associated with that loss of control? I mean, when you are in the founding stage, like you said, you wear all those hats and it's done your way. And now delegation is not, like you said, it's not just giving it to someone else to do, but letting them do it their way within reason, right? So isn't there a fear that sets in that you're losing control over the direction of your company to a degree, or sort of that micromanagement that you have to let go of?
Yeah, exactly. So fear inhibits a lot of growth in a company, a lot of growth of a leader. And we all know that fear is an emotion related to the unknown.
Yes.
And so as a coach, one of the ways we help overcome that fear is by being there with them, right? We'll ask, not unlike a therapist, we'll ask the very common question, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
Often we internalize that, and we think that because we're not doing it the way we used to, or we're not doing it ourselves, or we're not watching it happen, that we create all these fears of what could go wrong because we no longer have that level of control. And so, the coaching allows you that partnership, that support along that journey of realizing that the unknown isn't as scary as the fears had sort of led you to believe.
Did you go through all of that yourself, because all the startups you were in and the growth, and especially I think CD Now is the one you were talking about, that you went all the way to CEO, correct?
Yes. So I grew from CTO to COO to CEO within the span of my 5 years at CD Now.
That's amazing. And that was such a big company. I mean, I was in the internet field back then. I remember how hot that was. It's funny to think of now, isn't it, with so much that's changed? But boy, that was a big deal. So in your experience in that track, did you also face those fears? Or what was that like for you to move so quickly into such a big job?
Well, one of the advantages of moving quickly is sometimes it doesn't give you the opportunity to become afraid.
Yeah.
things too much. And that certainly was the case in CD Now, where we were doubling every 6 months
Wow.
in terms of both revenue and number of employees. But I'll tell a story because there was a lot of fear there for me. And so we were going through a particularly difficult period of time. The internet bubble was about to burst. The capital markets had changed, and we were running out of cash, and Wall Street changed how they were going to value our business, and we had no runway left. So it was a very dire period of our growth. We were about close to 700 people at the time, with about $150 million in revenue. Still losing probably $65 million a year, I believe.
Wow.
So we were not on a path to success, and everything was changing from under us. And the CEO at the time, I was COO, the CEO at the time, who was the founder of the company, was responding to it in a very emotional way. I mean, and think about it. Your baby, which you grew to be this amazing success story, is on the verge of collapse.
Right.
And I remember one day going home and being thankful I didn't have his job. That it's like, I can't imagine being in that position. There's no way I ever want to become a CEO.
Right.
And through a whole bunch of long stories, in a period of 1 month, I was offered that job.
Wow. There you were, your worst fears recognized.
It was, and the good thing was I was surrounded. I didn't have a coach at the time. After I became CEO, I did get a coach, but I didn't have a coach at the time. But I was surrounded by a whole bunch of great advisors and good friends who sort of helped me think through the process of taking the job and getting me started in the role. But I didn't automatically accept it. I needed coaching. I needed outside in perspectives to help overcome some of those fears.
Yeah. So you saw the value right there. And of course that deposited in you, I'm sure, a desire to help other people with that. One thing that the internet experience, for those of us that were in that industry, I mean, and it's unique to those of us who were in that industry, right? Or perhaps I could say those that lost a lot of money in that industry. The metrics were different back then, weren't they? It's the metrics of success. If you put .com by something, all of a sudden your stock tripled. I mean, it was something that we really haven't seen again. But one thing I want to ask you that I think is really interesting is, back then we had a lot of companies that just kept burning through cash and kept going and kept going. And there was this idea really that you just didn't give up, and it really didn't matter what you were losing until it mattered. And of course, at one point it mattered a lot. In general, when we look at entrepreneurs and we look at startups, at some point there's a decision to be made. Do I give up or do I keep going? And I'm asking you this because I think there's a parallel in life. There's a book that I love by Dr. Henry Cloud that talks about ending well, how to end well. And it's that versus quitting, right? But some things need to end, and how do you end things well? So when you look at startups, when you look at all of that, at what point do you say to somebody, you know what, I think this needs to end? And what does that take someone to accept that? Or do we just say, never give up, never quit, keep pushing forward?
It's unreasonable to think you could go on forever in something that might not be working. But it's also really difficult, as you observe, to see when that point might come. So one of the most important things I ask an entrepreneur to do, or anyone trying anything new, is to have a plan, to set clear expectations, measurable goals, a specific time frame for whatever it is that you want to try. And this was, I was running an incubator for a while, and this was particularly helpful for a lot of the later stage entrepreneurs, some of the older entrepreneurs who I was working with at this incubator. And in part because many of them were married in relationships with children, and they were shifting out of a corporate career into perhaps starting their own business.
Right.
And so the spouses would have a loose agreement. Hey, while you're on severance, why don't you go give that idea a try?
Right.
But there was never a formal agreement. And ultimately, there would be conflict. So 6 months into it, the entrepreneur would be looking at it saying, oh, I'm so close, I just need to achieve these couple of more things or spend this much more money and then I'll be there. And the significant other, the spouse, would say, look, you've been at it 6 months, why don't you go get a job?
Right.
And so, I saw in those relationships, I in that situation, I would say, start with a plan, have an agreement. I'm going to spend 6 months and $50,000 of our savings to accomplish these three things. And whether it's a partner asking you for that contract or whether you're doing it for yourself,
right,
it gives you that decision point where, 6 months, I'm going to measure how much I spent. I'm going to measure whether I'd accomplish it. And if I didn't, I will have thought about the various scenarios in advance, so I'm not responding emotionally when it happens.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's like you're setting up boundaries that you have to hold yourself to, that when you set them, you don't have the emotion tied to them, but when you reach them, you're in a high emotional state. That's a reality.
Yes.
And so you've already agreed with either, like you said, your spouse or with yourself. And I think that is a real challenge with entrepreneurs, is at what point are they walking away from something? Because what we all who have entrepreneurial mindsets, we all think of the, Winston Churchill, never quit, never quit, never quit, never, never, never quit, which is great, but not when you're at the point of you're beyond, the boundaries of what is reasonable anymore. And hey, there are people involved. There's a family involved. There's a spouse. And that actually brings me to another question, is when you're working with these entrepreneurs, and granted, the people you work with have been at it for some time. They've had success enough to come to you. They're past $1 million. How much personal change are you seeing happening with them? How much is it affecting their family? I would imagine as a coach, even in your line of business, you're seeing a lot of the personal life get mixed in with everything they're doing in their business.
Yes. And I will tell you that probably 50% of the clients that we started working with in 2019 were asked to go get a coach by their partner or significant other.
Wow. Really?
Because you think about being an entrepreneur, owning a business, the impact it has on your personal life, that we talk about work-life balance. And now you're putting in 60-hour weeks and you're never home and you're really stressed. And maybe you're waking up at 4 a.m. worried about some risk or some financial situation. And this affects your ability to be a husband or wife, to be a partner, to be a parent.
Yeah.
And you're often not present when you're home. So that's sometimes the breaking point. It's sometimes the significant other who says, I've had enough. You need a coach.
Yeah. And that's a selling point for people to do that ahead of that point, right? Is to anticipate that point coming into their life, because they're pushing themselves. It's a unique place to be. I always say, when you're an entrepreneur, all of your issues come out. You cannot hide any shortcoming. You cannot hide anything. They're all out on the table. And so that's an opportunity for you to address all of that. Or it's an opportunity for chaos, obviously. So one or the other. But I'm going to use that you talking about the personal pressure from a spouse or, somebody in their life to say, hey, get a coach. I want to use that just as a shift, because as I talked to you about before, I feel like what you do is so important, and you have an insight into that growth mindset that an entrepreneur, a business person has to adopt in order to go to the next level of success and push through to another level in their business. Now, the parallels with the personal life are obvious, but you and I had a great conversation, and I just have to bring you into that because I think you have a lot of value here. And I realize it's not part of Trajectify. You're not doing parent coaching, right? Not now.
we're not, and I think my children would say that I'm highly unqualified to do that.
Well, of course, all of our children say that about us, right? I mean, but that's why you get outside help. Like, the doctor can't heal his own. This is what happens. But yeah. I do want you to share kind of the parallels. I want you to talk about this mindset from a parenting standpoint, because we did have a great conversation about that, and I want my audience to benefit. Because there are so many parallels when you have children who are growing and going through stages, much like a business, right? That things change, the way you parent has to change. And then you get to that point where they're exploding in their growth. And you get to that point where, much like a client of yours who has hit a certain level of success, now the explosion is happening. Now, when I talk about explosion and growth, I'm talking about the teenage years, right? So share with our audience, what does it take for a parent? What do you go through when you look at that to be successful? What mindset do you need to have? What are some tricks, tools, whatever you can tell us, Mike? Give us some wise advice in that area.
Let me first start by agreeing wholeheartedly that the skills that we need to grow as a leader are very much the same skills that we need to become a good spouse or a good parent. And when I got that CD Now CEO job, not only did I have an executive coach, but I also had a therapist.
Wow.
A therapist to deal with the stress in my family, and my kids were both teenagers at the time. And I was surprised at the similarities between what I was learning from my executive coach and what I was learning from my therapist. And ultimately, it really did help me see that the skills that I needed to get better at the behaviors that I needed to adapt were going to work at home as well as in the workplace. And a lot of it is around, being empathetic, and some of it is around transparency, authenticity, and vulnerability, as Brene Brown would.
Right.
And some of it is around, structure and processes, accountability, clarity, communications, and as I was developing in my first CEO job, I was actually also figuring out how to be a better parent. And I think as one example, hopefully my kids won't be angry that I've shared some specific examples, but
Right.
But one of my kids, I won't name a gender, so that way they can.
There you go.
But was giving me the yelling and screaming, the tantrum about, you ruined my life because of something that I didn't want them to do as a teenager. And they were standing outside of the room and they slammed the door. And now I historically was the kind of parent who would say, well, how can you treat me that way after all I've done for you, the life I've given you, how much I care about you, all I do for you, and how, and I would pick a fight. We would pick a fight, and I remember that we were instructed that when you give your message, it's heard, and you don't need to get the last word, and you don't need to pick the fight. As long as you said your piece, it's there. And don't exacerbate a situation. And so I exercised a lot of discipline, right? to not respond. And I remember my kid then coming out a half hour later and saying, "Hey, Dad, about what you had said before."
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, to me, it was that aha moment that said, "Oh man, you see it." So it's just like, if I am conscientious about how I approach, in this case, conflict,
yes,
which is whether as a parent or a CEO, then I can diffuse situations where there's a lot of angry words.
Right.
And so how can I be more purposeful in how I respond in a conversation that could end up in conflict? And I began to use that, so I took something that I learned at home and I brought it into the workplace.
Wow.
And, vice versa. I've done it the other way around as well.
So it wasn't just diffusing the situation, but it was also being heard. You were actually heard because you didn't escalate it. And, people who work for you in a growing company, the tension comes in because the pressure comes in, right? Things are changing quickly. Yeah. And I think one of the top things they say that employees want is, praise and being understood, empathy. And so there is that parallel. Absolutely. It's not just the praise, but it's also that they have an empathetic boss, an empathetic leader, somebody who understands to the degree that they can what it is to be them. And, I don't remember who said it to me, and maybe it was you. It was a phone call after we had our first one, but somebody said, spend 15 minutes a day looking at life through your child's eyes. And that's incredible. Now, in my case, that would be an hour out of my day. So I'm struggling a little bit with the time there. So,
Well, but think about all the time that you save by not having this
right.
conflict, right? And think about the return on that investment of that time when you now raise, emotionally healthy kids.
Yeah, agreed. And again, not to overdo the parallel, but when you move from an entrepreneurial startup stage where there aren't as many employees and it's really on you, you don't think so much about them, right? You're thinking about what you're doing, and there is some of it, but now you are relying on a bigger army of people, and you need them to rally for you for the joint cause. So empathy needs to be there, understanding needs to be there, because you want a healthy environment, you want a healthy company, you want people who love to do their job and do it well. And so that parallel of you being, CEO, doing that well, and learning from, being a parent well, and I know that you've parented well, neither is easy, but I think the parallels are similar for those that want self-improvement. And at the end of the day, isn't that really what it's about? Do you really want it? Are you really seeking to grow your mindset?
Exactly. It's all about goals. And so whenever I start out with coaching, especially for a business owner, I don't only start with the company vision, I also start with the personal vision. Where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? And that will allow us to make sure that everything that you do is aligned, that every effort or dollar you put into your company is getting you to be where you want to be in life. And so often those conversations lead to them, to an entrepreneur considering, well, what does this mean for me and my spouse, or what does this mean for me and my kids? And those become a big part of their business decisions. And as well, there's those aha moments then when they realize that, maybe I because I put work-life balance as such a great need, maybe I have not been the best wife or husband, or the best parent. And then the conversation might shift to, how do I fix things at home?
Right. And I think ultimately, Mike, that's probably one of your biggest values, is having had that experience. There are a lot of coaches out there. That word is used, maybe overused. But what's unique about your positioning, I think, is that you've done it. You've been in startup, you get early stage, you get growth stage. You've gone from those early stages to CEO. And you have all the stories, you have all the bruises, you have all the wins, but you've done it in your family, and now you're at a point where you can pull all that together. Because I think anyone who's looking to have a coach take them to that next phase and stay in that growth mindset needs somebody who's that comprehensive. I really do. I don't think a coach is going to be as valuable unless they can address A to Z, because where is that line for the entrepreneur between their work life and their home life? It's very blurry at best.
It certainly helps with the empathy. And the one thing I will say, though, is that all good coaches have the ability to be empathetic.
Yes.
And so even if they haven't been in your shoes, they might be able to frame the situation so they can put themselves in your shoes and try to feel the emotions that you're feeling, or or ask the questions that you might be struggling with. And so certainly having the experience makes the empathy piece a lot easier. But I'll go back to the example that you used about spending 15 minutes putting yourself in, seeing the world through your child's eyes. Well, you were once that age. But when you were looking through those eyes at that age, you had a very different perspective, because your brain was wired differently. Clearly, you had a different life experience and, different capacity to think and feel. But so when the second time you're looking at the world through your child's eyes, you're not doing it as if you were that child in a way, because you're no longer that child, but you're doing it with the benefit of having grown so much since then. And that's a good coach can do that, right? A good coach will whether they remember what it was like to be in your shoes or not, if they've never been there, they could still frame the situation and put themselves where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. A good coach is trained to do that, naturally does that. A good coach asks powerful questions to uncover all of that. Certainly, absolutely. That's what good coaches do. So as a good coach, I want you to give kind of, in closing, I want you to give your best advice to an entrepreneur right now who's sitting at $1 million, wants to be at 10, needs to see that happen, doesn't know how to move forward. Give the top 1 or 2 things right now you would say to that person to inspire them and encourage them.
That advice shifts over time. So I'm going to say that right now, what we talk about the most, especially given the crisis after crisis that we've faced this year, it's focus on listening. So what I'm doing is, in a sense, teaching entrepreneurs, teaching business leaders to become coaches themselves, to ask questions and to listen. We are faced with social unrest, and the only way we're going to develop an awareness and acknowledgement of what to do about it is to ask questions and to listen, to get educated, to acknowledge. We are faced with an unprecedented economic crisis, and we don't know what's going to happen next. Even though this might feel like it's 2008, it's different, and recovery will be different, and there's a lot of uncertainty around that. We've got to listen, right? Talking about it isn't going to do anything. We need to listen. The same thing is true. We had a long conversation with some clients this morning about work from home. About people's employees don't necessarily want to go back to the office now that they have the green light to do so. And this is a time where entrepreneurs and business leaders need to ask their team questions and listen to the answers. So we're encouraging a tremendous amount of question asking and listening, intensive listening.
That's brilliant. That's right on point. That's exactly what we need right now, and we need it on a personal level as well. I don't think anybody else has a better solution than to start there, and then, God willing, the solutions come as a result of that. So that was awesome advice. So can you tell everybody how they can learn more about what you do, how they can get in touch with you? I know that you are really heavily involved in LinkedIn, and you publish some great stuff. So just talk about how people can interact with you more.
Sure, I am easily Googleable because of my unique last name. So it's Michael Krupit, Krupit. The company is Trajectify, Trajectify, and we have a website, trajectify.com. You can also email me at michael@krupit.com, and or just throw me into your search engine and I'll pop up real quick. And love to chat with new entrepreneurs. We run a lot of, especially when we're not, given the fact that we're not traveling a lot now, we have extra time, and we've been dedicating a lot of that extra time to the community. So we've been running programs like the Bootstrappers Breakfast at no charge. We've been running CEO roundtables at no charge. So we're providing a lot of opportunities to bring community together, to ask each other questions, to listen, and to learn and grow and get through the crisis together.
Yeah, well, this is definitely the season of serving and listening. Let's put those two together, right? That's where we all are. We have to help each other, and we will get past it. We will thrive somehow through it all. But you're right. This is a season of serving, and it's a great opportunity then for people to be able to interact with you with basically no barrier to entry there. So that's excellent. Well, Mike, thank you. You have a lot of wisdom. I could do the parent piece with you for like 2 hours, but maybe that's just because I need it. I don't know.
Well, and it feels good, right? It feels good to be with sometimes with people who have been through what you're through. It's that level of support, which is why we get together as communities. That level of support just makes it easier to sleep at night.
It is so true. We all need to talk to people who have been where we have been. So thank you, Mike. I appreciate your time so much. And I can't wait to see what you do. And let's just all believe a year from now, we are absolutely back where we wanted to be. And through a lot of this, through listening and asking powerful questions and helping each other out. So Mike, thank you for all that you do. I appreciate you giving your time to my community.
Thanks for chatting with me today, Elizabeth.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, we will see you online, and I will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Master Your Mindset Radio. Before you go, if you want to be part of a free online community of like-minded individuals for support, resources, and inspiration as you conquer your limiting beliefs and pursue your purpose, go to elizabethnader.com/community. That's elizabethnader.com/community, or search for Master Your Mindset Academy private group on Facebook. Looking forward to seeing you online.